For 5 centuries, the world was defined by walls that no man could scale and oceans that no ship could cross. The Arctic was the ultimate wall. It was a vast, frozen graveyard, a silent witness to the hubris of empires. From the ill-fated Franklin expedition of 1845 to the desperate search for the Northwest Passage, the North Pole was not a place of trade, but a place of death. But today, the silence is over. The wall is not just cracking, it is vanishing. We are standing at a pivotal moment in human history, an era where the maps we have relied on since the age of discovery are being rendered obsolete. This is the end of geography. As the planet warms, the Arctic ice cap is retreating at an unprecedented rate of 13% per decade, and in its place, a new blue ocean is emerging. This is not just an environmental catastrophe, it is the opening of the most significant maritime corridor since the inauguration of the Suez Canal in 1869. To understand the magnitude of this shift, one must look at the cold, hard numbers of global logistics. For decades, the global economy has been held hostage by geography. A standard container ship traveling from the industrial heartlands of China, ports like Shanghai or Ningbo, to the massive consumer markets of Northern Europe, such as Rotterdam or Hamburg, is forced to take a long, arduous journey south. This route takes the vessel through the South China Sea, the pirate-prone waters of the Strait of Malacca, across the vast Indian Ocean, through the volatile Gulf of Aden, and finally into the narrow bottleneck of the Suez Canal. It is a journey of roughly 21,000 kilometers that consumes 35 to 40 days of fuel, labor, and time. But the Northern Sea Route, or NSR, changes everything. By cutting across the top of the world, along the Siberian coastline, that same journey is slashed to 13,000 kilometers. We are talking about a 40% reduction in distance and a savings of 15 to 20 days at sea. In an industry where a single day of operation for a Triple-E class vessel can cost $50,000 in fuel alone, the Arctic shortcut is not just an option, it is an economic revolution. But the Arctic is not merely a shortcut for container ships carrying electronics and sneakers. It is a treasure chest that has been locked under 3 meters of ice for millennia. According to the United States Geological Survey, the area north of the Arctic Circle holds an estimated 90 billion barrels of undiscovered oil, 1,669 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and 44 billion barrels of natural gas liquids. This represents 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and a staggering 30% of its undiscovered BEM. As traditional reserves in the Middle East and the North Sea begin to decline, the Arctic is the final frontier for the hydrocarbon age. But the riches don't stop at fossil fuels. The retreating ice is exposing massive deposits of rare earth minerals, the cobalt, nickel, and platinum required for the green energy transition. This is the ultimate geopolitical irony. The very climate change caused by burning fossil fuels is granting us access to the materials needed to build electric vehicles and wind turbines. This environmental paradox has triggered a coal gold rush. Unlike the gold rushes of the 19th century, this isn't a race for individuals. It is a race for superpowers. Russia, the United States, China, Canada, and the Nordic nations are all maneuvering for position. The Arctic Council, once a quiet forum for environmental cooperation, has become a diplomatic battlefield. The legal framework governing this region, primarily the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, is being pushed to its absolute limit. Nations are deploying scientific teams to map the seabed, not for the sake of science, but to prove that underwater mountain ranges, like the Lomonosov Ridge, are geological extensions of their own continental shelves. If a nation can prove this, they can claim sovereign rights over the resources on and beneath that seabed, extending their reach far beyond the standard 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. The stakes could not be higher. We are talking about the control of the pulse of global trade and the world's last great energy bank. As the ice-free summer becomes a scientific certainty rather than a distant prediction, the geopolitical gravity of the planet is shifting north. The warm water ports of the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, which have dominated trade for centuries, are watching as a new northern Mediterranean is born. This is a transformation that will create new winners and losers on the global stage. It will make some nations fabulously wealthy and render others strategically irrelevant. But as the titans of the 21st century, the United States, Russia, and China rush into this frozen void, they are entering a landscape that is as dangerous as it is profitable. The Arctic is not a place that forgives mistakes. The extreme cold, the unpredictable drift of zombie ice, and the total lack of search and rescue infrastructure make the Northern Sea Route the most hazardous shipping lane on Earth. As we begin this deep dive into the frozen gold mine, we must ask ourselves, are we witnessing the birth of a more efficient global economy, or are we watching the world's great powers stumble into a new kind of conflict? The Arctic awakening is here, and it is reshaping the world in ways we are only beginning to understand. The ice is telling a story of transformation, but beneath that story lies a darker narrative of militarization, greed, and a planet in crisis. The end of geography has arrived, and for those who control the North, the rewards will be infinite. But for the rest of the world, the cost may be higher than anyone ever imagined. If the Arctic is a locked door, Russia is the only nation on Earth that holds the keys. For Vladimir Putin, the Northern Sea Route is not a mere commercial project. It is a national transport artery that ensures Russia's survival in a world of increasing isolation. While Western analysts often dismiss Russia as a gas station with nukes, they fail to grasp the sheer engineering audacity occurring in the high north. Russia is currently executing the most ambitious industrial and military buildup in the history of the Arctic, turning a desolate frozen coastline into a 21st century fortress. This strategy is built on two pillars: the world's only fleet of nuclear-powered icebreakers and a massive, interconnected network of sophisticated military bases designed to project power thousands of miles into the deep blue. To understand the Russian advantage, one must look at the technology that makes their dominance possible. In the freezing waters of the Kara Sea, the laws of physics are the enemy. Conventional diesel-powered icebreakers, used by countries like Canada or the United States, have a fatal flaw. They are limited by their fuel capacity. They cannot stay at sea for months on end, and they struggle to maintain the immense power needed to crush through ice that can be up to 3 or 4 meters thick. Russia solved this problem by doing what they do best, applying nuclear power to maritime dominance. The Arktika-class icebreakers, powered by the RITE M200 dual reactor system, are the most powerful of their kind ever built. These 33,000-ton behemoths do not just sail through the ice. They use their immense weight and nuclear-generated heat to physically pulverize the frozen crust. They can operate for 7 years without refueling, allowing Russia to keep the Northern Sea Route open even in the pitch-black darkness of the polar winter. This is absolute accessibility, a strategic capability that no other nation can currently match. But what is Russia protecting with this nuclear armada? The answer lies in the Yamal Peninsula, a name that means the end of the world in the local Nenets language. Here, on a slab of permafrost that feels like another planet, Russia has constructed the Yamal LNG project. This is a $27 billion masterpiece of engineering, a liquefied natural gas plant that defies the environment. Because the Arctic air is so cold, the process of liquefying gas is actually more efficient there than in Qatar or Australia. Through a partnership with French and Chinese investors, Russia has built a fleet of Arc-7 icebreaking tankers. These ships are remarkable. They are both massive cargo carriers and icebreakers in their own right. They allow Russia to ship gas directly to the hungry markets of East Asia in just 15 days, completely bypassing the Western-controlled Suez Canal and avoiding the threat of sanctions that haunt their westward pipelines. For the Kremlin, Yamal is not just a gas plant. It is proof that Russia can thrive without the West. However, where there is vast wealth, there is also massive military protection. Over the last decade, Russia has reopened over 50 abandoned Soviet-era military bases along its 15,000-mile Arctic coastline. But these are not the rusty shacks of the 1970s. These are state-of-the-art outposts like the Arctic Trefoil on Alexandra Land. This futuristic, shamrock-shaped structure, it is the northernmost permanent building in the world, capable of housing 150 soldiers for over a year without outside support. These bases are equipped with long-range radar systems and the Bastion P coastal missile system, which can sink a destroyer from 300 kilometers away. Russia is effectively creating a no-go zone in the Arctic, a strategy known as anti-access/area denial, or A2/AD. They have even deployed the S-400 Triumph air defense system to the high latitudes, ensuring that the skies above the northern sea route are as tightly controlled as the waters below. This militarization serves a specific legal purpose. Russia claims that the northern sea route consists of internal waters. According to Moscow's interpretation of international law, any foreign warship and even commercial vessels must provide 45 days notice and take a Russian pilot on board to navigate the route. To reinforce this claim, they have deployed the Northern Fleet, headquartered in Severomorsk. This fleet contains the core of Russia's sea-based nuclear deterrent, the Borei-class submarines. These vessels are designed to dive deep beneath the Arctic ice cap, where they are virtually impossible to track with sonar or satellites. From these bastions, they can launch nuclear missiles at any target on Earth. The Arctic ice, therefore, acts as a natural shield for Russia's most deadly weapons. But this fortress is built on a foundation of melting ground. The permafrost, the frozen soil that supports these massive bases and pipelines, is thawing. In the city of Norilsk, apartment buildings are cracking, and in 2020, a massive fuel tank collapsed because the ground beneath it turned to mud, spilling 20,000 tons of diesel into the Arctic ecosystem. This is the great Russian vulnerability. For all their nuclear icebreakers and missile batteries, they cannot stop the ground from liquefying. Every ruble spent on military buildup is a ruble that must also be spent on shoring up sinking infrastructure. Furthermore, the cost of maintaining this polar fortress is astronomical. Russia is betting its entire national treasury on the idea that the Northern Sea route will become a global toll road. If the world's shipping companies decide that the risk of Russian control is too high, or if the price of LNG drops, the Kremlin's Arctic dream could become a frozen nightmare. The world is watching as Russia stakes its claim. This is a game of high-stakes poker played in sub-zero temperatures. Moscow has laid its cards on the table. They have the geography, they have the technology, and they have the military will to hold the North. But as we look across the ice, we see another player emerging from the fog, a player with even more money and an even longer strategic vision. China is no longer content to let Russia dominate the North alone. The dragon is moving on to the ice, and the partnership between these two titans will determine the future of the Northern Sea route. But as we will see in the next chapter, this is a partnership built on necessity, not trust. While Russia provides the geographic fortress and the nuclear brute force, the Arctic's transformation into a global trade artery would be impossible without the insatiable hunger and deep pockets of the People's Republic of China. For Beijing, the North Pole is not a distant, frozen wasteland. It is a critical frontier in their quest for global hegemony. In 2018, China released a landmark white paper that sent shockwaves through the diplomatic corridors of the West. They officially declared themselves a near-Arctic state. Geographically, this is a stretch. The southernmost tip of China is nearly 1,500 miles away from the Arctic Circle. Yet, Beijing's claim is not based on latitude, but on strategic interest. They have integrated the Arctic into President Xi Jinping's trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, rebranding the Northern Sea Route as the Polar Silk Road. This is not just about commerce. It is a grand strategy designed to break the maritime encirclement of the Chinese mainland. To understand why China is betting its economic future on the ice, one must look at a map of Southeast Asia. Currently, 80% of China's oil imports and a massive portion of its global trade must pass through the narrow 1.5-mile-wide Strait of Malacca. Chinese strategists refer to this as the Malacca Trap. In any potential conflict with the United States or its regional allies, the U.S. Navy could effectively turn off the lights in Beijing by blockading this single choke point. For a superpower that relies on uninterrupted energy flows and global exports, this vulnerability is existential. The Polar Silk Road is the ultimate escape plan. By shifting its trade to the Northern Sea Route, China creates a secure, high-speed corridor that is entirely outside the reach of the U.S. 7th Fleet. This is about more than just saving 10 days of shipping time. It is about building a sanctions-proof economy. China's approach to the Arctic is a masterclass in strategic patience. They have not sought to challenge Russian sovereignty directly. Instead, they have made themselves indispensable to the Kremlin. When Western banks and oil majors like Shell and BP pulled out of Russian Arctic projects following the invasion of Ukraine, China was waiting in the wings. Through state-backed giants like CNPC and the Silk Road Fund, Beijing poured billions into the Yamal and Arctic LNG-2 projects. Today, China owns a massive stake in Russia's energy future, effectively turning the Russian Arctic into a resource colony for the Chinese industrial machine. In return for this capital, China is gaining what it lacks most: operational experience in polar waters. In 2025, Chinese shipping operators completed a record number of container voyages through the NSR, with vessels like the Istanbul Bridge completing the transit in just 20 days, a powerful symbol of the route's commercial maturity. But the Dragon's ambitions are not limited to energy. The retreating ice is uncovering a treasure trove of the materials that will define the 21st century: rare earth elements. The Arctic holds some of the world's largest deposits of neodymium, praseodymium, and dysprosium, minerals essential for everything from fighter jet sensors to the permanent magnets in electric vehicle motors. China already controls over 85% of the world's rare earth processing capacity. By securing mining rights in Greenland and northern Russia, Beijing is attempting to establish a polar monopoly on the green energy revolution. They understand that while oil fueled the 20th century, critical minerals will fuel the 21st. If China controls the supply of these minerals from the Arctic, they will hold the keys to the world's transition to a low-carbon economy. To project this influence, China is rapidly closing the icebreaker gap. While the U.S. is struggling to build even one new heavy icebreaker, China has launched a fleet of domestically built vessels, led by the Zhuilong 2. This ship is a technological marvel featuring a dual-directional hull that can crush through ice while moving both forward and backward. But more ominously, China is rumored to be developing its first nuclear-powered icebreaker. Naval experts believe this vessel will serve as a floating test bed for the nuclear propulsion systems intended for China's next generation of aircraft carriers. This is the dual-use reality of the Polar Silk Road. Every scientific research station built by China in the Arctic is also a potential node for satellite tracking and underwater surveillance. And every commercial icebreaker is a blueprint for future naval dominance. Yet this partnership between the Dragon and the Bear is a marriage of convenience, not love. Russia, historically paranoid about its northern borders, views China's near-Arctic ambitions with a mix of gratitude and suspicion. For now, Moscow needs Beijing's money to build the ports and the pipelines that the West has blocked. But as China's influence grows, Russia risks becoming a junior partner in its own backyard. Beijing is already eyeing the Central Arctic route, a path that would go directly across the North Pole, completely avoiding Russian territorial waters. This route would be shorter, cheaper, and truly independent of any other nation's control. As the ice continues to melt, the cooperation between Moscow and Beijing may eventually give way to a fierce competition for who truly owns the top of the world. As we look toward 2030, the Polar Silk Road is no longer a futuristic dream. It is an active digital and physical reality. China is laying thousands of miles of fiber optic cables on the Arctic seabed, the digital Silk Road, to ensure its communications can never be severed by Western power. They are building a world where Shanghai and Rotterdam are connected by a path of ice and silicon, a path that ignores the old rules of geography and the old guardians of the sea. The Dragon has moved onto the ice, and in doing so, it has ensured that the battle for the Arctic will not be a two-way fight between the East and West, but a complex three-dimensional struggle for the very future of global trade. For decades, the Arctic was governed by the mantra, high north, low tension. It was a place of pristine scientific cooperation and environmental treaties that seemed shielded from the messy geopolitics of the rest of the world. But as we move deeper into 2026, that era of innocence is officially dead. The West has finally woken up to a chilling reality. While they were bogged down in the sands of the Middle East and the political quagmires of the 2000s, Russia and China were quietly carving up the roof of the world. The Arctic is no longer a remote flank. It is the front line of a new, three-dimensional Cold War. With the historic accession of Finland and Sweden, NATO has transformed into an Arctic alliance. But it is an alliance that is playing a desperate, high-stakes game of catch-up. The military buildup we are witnessing in 2025 and 2026 has no historical precedent since the height of the Soviet era. NATO's Nordic response exercises have evolved from occasional training drills into massive multi-domain displays of force involving over 20,000 troops from 13 nations. The United States has reactivated its 11th Airborne Division in Alaska, the Arctic Angels, specifically trained for extreme cold weather combat where standard equipment fails and the environment is as deadly as the enemy. This is no longer preparation for a hypothetical future. This is positioning for a conflict that many now believe is inevitable. If you found this deep dive insightful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us continue uncovering the forces shaping our world.